how to replace a full-time developer on your team, or even if you don't even have a developer, but you need a developer. How can you replace that with an AI agent? In this video, I'll show you exactly what it's like or how you can proceed to replace an entire developer for your personal needs, for your business, whatever it is, what the structure looks like, how you can actually schedule out these sub-agents to perform tasks on their own time, to create you deliverables, create you an actual project, and how to hook everything up together so you're actually getting some sort of results. Whether it's getting shipped to production, whether it's getting shipped to development, it's really up to you what you prompt it at the end of the day. But it's very real now where if you schedule and you construct the foundation correctly for your sub-agents, you can have these things doing work for you 24/7, whether it's for your own projects, whether it's for a specific business you're working on, or whether it's even just to send simple MVPs and say like tastes as a lead magnet to potential clients. So there are many different use cases how you can pretty much repurpose this developer sub-agent to do work for you and get you something actually that is tangible to look at and play with. Without anything else to say, let's get right into the computer. Let's get right into it. How to replace a whole entire developer with an AI agent, whether you're going to be doing this with your primary main agent or if you're going to be doing this with a sub-agent. By the way, when I'm referencing to main agent or sub-agent, all I really mean is when you go into the agents tab, you have these various different kinds of agents. So whether it's your main, which is like the primary one, which pretty much gets injected all the primary context and information on every single news session, or specific sub-agents where they have very specific purposes. In this case, I created a demo dev agent, and then from there it has its own files, its own tools, its own skills, specific channels where it makes updates to. That's what I mean. Now, the main bottleneck that people have is that we are primarily the constraint here. And then when that becomes a constraint, how can you either offload, cut people or headcount, or even replicate yourself so you can have something happening in the background 24/7, whether it's 24/7, whether it's on scheduled time, whether it's say a product feature request gets inputted by a customer. How can you potentially spawn something out there that exists to perform work for you where otherwise you may not have enough time or capacity to do it? The main goal here is to develop something that can actually do all this for you, and that's the whole point of replacing your current developer or however you are developing your product, your business, or whatever with a developer agent. Now, the way the system works, I just want to kind of give you a grasp of how I think about this from a high level so you can actually implement it into your own infrastructure. And I'll kind of show you like the layout and the mapping of what it actually looks like internally. But from an outside perspective, just so you have a sort of like meta overview, it's very simple. You give these agents, or whether even it's your sub-agent, a goal, you give them tasks to complete, and then all they do is just execute, right? It executes based on specific triggers, on hooks. It executes on events, on maybe say some piece of information came in. Whatever this trigger, this event is, it executes. That's how it works. So once you actually have the agent, all it's really doing is it's scheduled on a wake up. It's scheduled to wake up on a specific action or event that happens. Once it does, it builds and develops, and then it updates its own memory file, the current day's memory file, or some other source of information where, say, in the future, when it is coming back and actually looking at what has been done, it doesn't just start looping for no reason and doing the same thing a previous session already did. So it's actually moving things forward, and it's kind of giving a check on, oh, hey, like we already did this. We don't have to go back and start with the foundation with the research again. You know what I mean? Because when we are scheduling out these cron prompts or like these scheduled tasks, just, to simply word it, you're giving it a master prompt, and this prompt is basically very specific. I'll show you the prompt, right? But the prompt is like, hey, you want to go here to this task board. You want to review your own goals. You want to review the last memory session update that we had. And then from there, you want to make the best assessment in terms of what makes the most sense right now to work on, whether it's a specific task, a new goal to break up to complete a project, or what's the next most logical thing to do in order to complete the overarching goal. Because anytime you prompt an agent or you're working with an agent, it has some sort of meta goal in order to follow and execute. If you don't give these things goals and you don't let them break down their tasks where it can be saved somewhere, then the problem is anytime you spawn these agents, they have no idea what the heck they're doing. So how do you overcome that? You give them goals somewhere where it lives. In this case, I'll show you how to map it to the specific sub-agent. And then from there, what you do is you guide them in terms of how they are actually accessing their task files and then what they're doing about it, right? Obviously, you want them to be updating and working on a set of tasks. So if your projects and tasks are going to be really intensive and heavy, you probably don't want them to be doing 2, 3, 4, 5 things at the same time per session. You probably want 1 or 2 key things, because these context windows can really build up, especially if you're coding something really, really big, right? Like a massive project. Otherwise, if it's a simple slideshow, a simple what's it called? A simple isolated session that gets spawned with this agent can pretty much cover the whole entire thing. But that's kind of how it looks like from a meta level. And if you actually had to break this down into a flow chart, it's pretty much the same thing I just outlined. There's a specific event that happens, which is a wake up in this case. It triggers a specific agent to wake up. In this case, we dedicated the agent to be a developer agent. And then from there, what it does is it reads its own tasks, right? So I have this concept, at least in my directory of like how I run these things, is there's a task.md. And this task.md, it's not a list of tasks. I found that to be really efficient if you were running these sub-agents to actually look at their own tasks, but instead, this task.md, it just outlines how to actually use a source of truth. So if you're using something like Asana, if you're using a tool like, I don't know, Trello or something else to manage and organize all your tasks, the purpose of this file is to show you, or to show the agent, how it can actually use this board. If you have like naming conventions, if you have very specific ways how you workflow with tasks, if you kind of want the agent to know, okay, hey, don't do this massive thing all at once, but just kind of break it down in pieces. So that's the whole point of that task. And then from there, once it does something, it goes out and builds, it commits. You have to give it access to a repo, usually with like a fine-grained token that expires every so-and-so, unless you set no expiration. I don't know, whatever you feel comfortable with. But then from there, it updates, or I have a typo here, should not update the task.md, but should update its own memory file, whether it's the current day memory file or it's some other source of truth. So whether, say, there's like a scratch file where it can like update and look at every single session where it knows what it did last time, whether or not it makes sense to actually work on it or not. But you get the point. Now, another important thing, or I'll also show you inside of the directory, but what's also important here is to have the sub-agent to have its own dedicated skills and tools. Because if it doesn't have its own dedicated skills and tools, it's not going to be able to complete anything. So there are a few essential ones. One essential one that you want to have a skill file for in a tool integration with is GitHub. This thing needs to be able to push commits and changes to some sort of repository online. That's a pretty big one. You definitely should have that. Another one is like a deployment platform. So in this case, Vercel is probably one of the easiest ones you can work with. If you give it a skill file, if you create a skill file and you give it the integration, it'll be literally able to just create and ship things. So for instance, this whole entire slide, I just gave my agent the outline of it, and it pretty much shipped it to me. There were like a few changes I had to do, but nonetheless, this is all deployed on Vercel right now. The other one is, especially if you're doing like research, if you want to like properly scope out a task, this one's not necessary. And I know it says browser intelligence here, but you can pretty much just use some sort of research tool online. So it's anything from, say, Perplexity, Parallel AI, or even like Exa or whatever, where they have like resources. It can go out there and do some thorough research tasks online. Then what you do is you get quality data versus just a simple web search that comes natively with some of these AIs. If you're using an actual dedicated research software or platform, then you're gonna get much better data, in my opinion. And then this one's totally optional, but using maybe something like Replicate or some other API integration, where what you can do is you can just hook it up to this thing, and this thing can pretty much just print out video content or some sort of image content, whatever you're using. I know that now there's a new feature set on some of these newer Gemini models where now they can actually just within the API just generate, with the actual model itself, it can just generate images, you know what I mean? So I think that's probably going to be the future with some of these other AI integrations. But, you know, until then just, I guess you can say you can hook it up to like Replicate or something. And then wherever you are managing your task, or your Trello board in this case. So I'm going to show you an example of what it looks like in Trello, but you want this thing to have access to, say, a Trello board or something where it can manage the task and run these tasks to do something specific, right? And I also listed here Compose here, but that's totally optional. But if you have that there, what happens is you give it access to a bunch of tools. You pretty much have this single source of truth where it can integrate with a bunch of different tools, create all these different skills and stuff like that. And then from there, you can just create a bunch of connectors, right? So I think it's just like pretty easy in terms of just having everything connected through a single source of truth. Some things you can't, honestly, and that's fine, or it's just very limited, but that's just kind of the cost of doing that. But nonetheless, I just wanted to add it there. So now there's two ways actually to run this if you were to set a cron job. So the first way is you can actually just have the main agent do anything, and by this, what I mean is by actually setting and creating the cron job prompt. So if you go to crons and you're picking which agent, here you would just put in the agent ID, the name of the agent. So this was like the morning agent, the agent ID main in this case, or dev, whatever the agent ID is that you're triggering. You would want to have this information here filled out. So like what is being scheduled on specific time. Here in this case, I'm outlining 2 ways how you can pretty much run this thing. So either the main agent, which pretty much has context of everything, or these sub agents, which you're trying to make them narrow. And ideally that's the route we want to go, because we want them narrow and we want them to be specific towards specific tasks. I think there's like a quick correction I'd like to make here to what I wrote, but you can use the main agent for like general purpose things. And don't get me wrong, you can like ship things and do pretty good with it. What I wanted, and you can also run both these in parallel. But the thing about the sub agent is when you make it specialized towards a specific task or automation that you're looking to create, it tends to give better results, right? And you can run both of these in isolated environments. I should have double checked with and then here usually what's important is when you're filling out these cron prompts, it's going to show you like a timeout. Now it's optional to even put anything here, but ideally if you expect these things to be running for quite a bit, then you probably want a timeout, maybe like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It really depends what it's doing, because you don't want this thing infinitely running in a loop or just forever, you know what I mean? So at some point, it's good just to have something there. And then an announcement delivery, exactly where this thing would be sending. So if you have like a Slack channel, so here you can be like where you want this thing to message you. So Slack, Discord, whatever you have, and then to the channel ID. So whether you are spawning these things through scheduled task or just like telling the main agent to spawn something, that's kind of how they would be spawned. And then how it actually works when you have a goals.md and task.md. So the goals is pretty much like the high level overview of what you're trying to achieve. And then task.md is pretty much just a outline of like the convention in terms of like how to work with your tasks. Now, if we actually go into my own goals.md for the specific agent here, so we have the dev agent, and what we got here is pretty much the current mission of like what kind of the outline is. So here's pretty much where you do all the scoping of like what the task is, and this is all like malleable. It's all subject to change and stuff like that. And by the way, when we were running these agents, you don't want to like run them like indefinitely forever unless you have some sort of system to be able to handle that. Here, this current system here is going with the assumption that you are trying to create a task or some sort of job, or it's listening to a specific event, and only then it gets triggered. You know what I mean? You don't want this thing indefinitely running and just doing work for you for no reason, because I've done that. And honestly, at some point, it's just running in circles, or it starts to do things that just doesn't make any sense. So it's always just pretty good just to kind of like have a grip on what this thing's actually doing. You know what I mean? That's why there are managers for developers, you know what I mean? There are managers for employees and stuff like that. So that kind of applies here. When there's literally no work to do, then don't have this thing running. Otherwise, you're just wasting tokens for no reason. But nonetheless, here in the goals, what you want to do is you want to outline everything. And then in the task.md, what you want to do here is you want to pretty much give the conventions in terms of like how to actually work with the board. What's the board ID? Where's the URL actually? You know what I mean? How do you label the tasks? What kind of rules do you have and stuff like that, right? And then when it actually comes to working with a Trello board, so my AI agent has access to my whole entire Trello account. This is just one specific board here, just for example purposes and stuff. But if you were to create a project, you would want to identify the goal, and then you can literally just prompt the AI to be like, hey, break this down into all like, a series of tasks that you have to do. So what is the project outline, and then break it all down. So if it were to break everything down, it would give you a whole set of tasks of like everything from like the roadmap from the beginning, what kind of connectors or what kind of integrations we need to have. Maybe there's some blocked things like you may be able, or you may have to go out there and connect a Supabase account, so some sort of database, so you can actually connect the front end or the back end. So there are like a few outline tasks of like what to do, and you can pretty much let the AI decide, okay, what's here to do, what is it going to be blocked on, or what you should do as the owner or the overseer. And then from there, on every single scheduled task, it would see what to prioritize what's happening in doing, prioritize what's happening in to do, you know what I mean, as a second priority. And then from there, try to get as many things into done until there's no more tasks. And it would only create more tasks unless if you instruct it that it has the rule or like the capability to create more tasks, or if it doesn't, then you can kind of like let it know, hey, break down more tasks if there's something specific it has to do. It totally depends. But the way these work in conjunction is that you need a goal for the agent to work off, and then you need tasks for it to know what to do. Otherwise, it's just hallucinating and giving you BS results. You know what I mean? That's obviously not what we want. So you need two things. You know what I mean? Like, what's the goal? What are you trying to do with this thing? What's like the vision? Then let it break down the tasks inside the source of truth that it would be referencing, and then from there, let it get to work. So what are some use cases? One is potentially solo projects, right? If you wanted an idea to go out there, or you just wanted simply something to work on, or you have this vision for a product, you can just get this thing to pretty much map out the outline of what you're looking for it to do, and then just work 24/7 to get this thing up versus you just prompting it. You know what I mean? Especially if you don't have time. If you have the infrastructure and you pretty much just like set it all up so it's just running and doing its own thing, then it's obviously just gonna be creating you some projects. So recently, just to kind of test things out, I basically got my AI to create this project here on its own, to do some research, find an opportunity to create a product and see whether or not there's any fit in terms of people wanting this or not. You know what I mean? So it was doing some outreaches, it was doing some email outreaches, and it was trying to get people onto our product. So I gave access to a few things online, and honestly, we didn't get much traction, unfortunately, but it pretty much shipped everything. It researched the product. It found a massive pain point from people of just solo developers not wanting to market or get themselves out there. So the idea was to pretty much build a product where we do all the marketing for them with just agents, right? This is kind of how far we got with it, and then just started doing some outreaches, started creating some blogs pretty much every single day on scheduled times. And it was just trying to build the hype for the product before actually building it. You know what I mean? So this is just like a little experiment thing I ran just to just take some tasks off my plate to see what this thing can build and ship all on its own with its own research. Another thing is product features. So if you've ever been in development or you're working on your own product, especially if you're collecting your own user feedback, you can trigger events to happen where, say, when new data comes in, you can spawn these agents to wake up, flag what was just taken, and whether or not to make sense, and whether or not to do anything on that data. So if there's a bug, you can pretty much get this agent to wake up, look for the bugs exactly where the feedback came, fix it, send a pull request to main, or even like mention or contact you in Slack or Discord or your team or whoever's responsible for the product. And then from there, you can decide whether or not to pull the request into main and ship it to prod. You know what I mean? So that's just one way how you can automate like a whole entire development cycle of, rather than your team or your personal developer doing anything about it, you just have this fully automated. So for instance, like how this would actually flow out to a map and how it can actually work tactically, you can have, say, a daily product reviewer or like feedback reviewer agent where it's scheduled on a daily basis to look at what kind of user feedback is coming in. And if there's any sort of user feedback that comes in, this is just a cron prompt, by the way. It's just a scheduled task. So you can have a separate sub agent that does this, or even the main agent, you know what I mean? Up to you. But you can have a separate subtask where every single day at 12 p.m., this agent reviews product feedback that comes to your product. And then what it does is it can work with a Trello board or some sort of project board where it can flag, oh, hey, there's a bug here by this user. There's a bug here by another user, whatever. And then it pretty much outlines the bug and then the whole entire like piece of feedback, and then where it can actually be, or how it could potentially be solved. So whether or not that needs to be approved or not, that's up to you. But if the bug gets there, it maps it out into, say, the Trello board. From here, it can literally just mention as a bug. And then what your agent can do on schedule wakes, you can also put into the prompt, hey, check if there are any bugs. You know what I mean? Check if there are any bugs, and then from there, work on bugs, which are also a priority, and then also prioritize this other project. So I'll get to the prompt in just a moment. And I know this one kind of coincides, or I know this one just sounds kind of similar to case one, but it's pretty much the same thing, a full product build. So you can literally just set up the whole entire scope of what the project is, get this thing to outline the task and the product roadmap, and then pretty much just get this thing building 24/7, or like through, say, like from 8 to 5 p.m. every single day while you're kind of there to kind of like guide it, you know what I mean? But you can pretty much get a whole entire product shipped just with this thing working in the background. But like I said, it's super important that you don't have this thing running 24/7, because if you are letting this thing run 24/7, what's ultimately going to happen is sometimes it will just like run into tasks that are it just does it for no reason. So you want to be letting this thing be productive and actually intentional with every single wake session. Otherwise, if it just runs out of tasks and like the job is done, then it's just going to be doing BS. So from a simple infrastructure perspective, like how like these soul files look like and everything, it's very simple, you know what I mean? So like the soul with the agents.md files, so like on every single wake up, like what it can do, what it can't do, like these should just be simple nudges in terms of like how to guide the agent. So when it comes to tools, like okay, what kind of tools and access it has, you know what I mean? So like where to find the skill or like the integration for accessing specific tools and skills to execute something, what the user is, like, you know, who you are, a little bit about you, like what's this project we're trying to build. Like these are just like some little things. Like honestly, you don't need all of these. Like probably even the user, you probably don't even need that. Memory is a pretty important one too. So whether there's like some specific information that you need to know about your user, your GitHub account, so you can do pushes and stuff like that. That's also pretty essential. And then skills, of course, you want to have these skills created so the tools and the skill files can work together and actually let your AI get work done. And then when you actually come into agents inside OpenClaw, you can pretty much see everything here for this specific agent, right? The channels has access to the skills and stuff like that. So it should be here once it's created. I didn't mention the prompt, but at the end, like you do want a prompt for this thing. Because when we come here and you are spawning the very specific agent, so in this case, the dev, which is the agent ID that is created inside of your directory for OpenClaw, you want to give it a prompt, because when you just schedule the prompt and this thing is running. So here, for instance, for this cron I have, I can run it or I can schedule it for specific times. If this thing doesn't have a prompt, it's not going to know what to do. Like, sure, like it'll just wake up this agent for no reason. And then it's like, what does it even do? So you have to give it a prompt. And the way I usually do is I give it multiple phases. So I give it an identity of like what it is. Okay, you're a developer, you're building this. You don't just give me research files, but you actually build and ship things, right? Especially if you're using a cheaper model, you got to make that explicit. But if you're using something more advanced or using like a Claude model or something like that, you probably don't really need to go into detail with all like these like identities and stuff like that. But you're pretty much here prompting the agent to do a few things. So check today's current memory log, check maybe yesterday's, what's finished, what was last worked on, especially if you're like doing a sprint of like a development cycle. If you're doing a development cycle sprint, you definitely want it to be checking the current days and the previous days, or maybe even the weeks of like all the progress being done. Once it checks everything, it checks the Trello board, and from there where to go, or like wherever else your tasks are, right? From there, you can also prompt into this, I forgot to mention here, but like, hey, check your current goals.md, check your current task.md, or like any other critical files. So it injects it into its memory. And then from there, it has more context of like what it's doing in this current session. And these sessions, they're going to be isolated sessions. They're not the same spawn sessions from before. They're just isolated sessions. So it's always fresh. That's why you want to pretty much give it this context up ahead. You're going to want to pretty much prompt it to execute, get the task done, whatever it is, based on like what's currently in the goals.md and the task.md, how much capacity it has to create. So usually I like to keep it somewhere between 2, 3, and maybe with an optional research task. So like you don't want this thing just researching all the time. You want this thing actually executing. And you got to be clear in terms of like what is a deliverable and what is not a deliverable. So whether that is currently here in the prompt or whether that is somewhere like actually within its own memory file. And then from there, like at the end, after it's been executing and completed a set of work in a session, then what you want it to do is to report, whether it's say to your Discord channel, whether to Slack, or it's like ping you personally. However, you have to get the ID for that channel, let it ping you, and then from there, it'll let you know exactly what it did. And by the way, when it comes to like setting up these crons, I like to set them in a very specific way. So whether you are running these things every single day, so for instance here with this convention, this prompt or this cron would run every single day between 8 and 6 p.m. Los Angeles time. Here, if you were to just copy this, this would run Monday through Friday, 8 to 7, or well, yeah, it would run from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it really depends like how long you want it, when you want it running, and then from there you would just pretty much launch and ship the cron. And when I say cron, I just mean this here. You just have to edit it. Once it's scheduled, it'll be scheduled on a specific task. And then remember, at the end of the day, like what you're doing here is you're managing your own developer, your own sub-agent that can actually go out there and work. If this thing's just going to be indefinitely doing work for no reason, then it's just at some point going to lead to nowhere. So you do need some sort of oversight, or you do need some sort of like correction mechanism in your workflow where say you are checking every day or every other day in terms of like what it's doing, you know what I mean? Because at some point it could just like loop and do something stupid for no reason. Or say if you're just working through a product sprint or something very specific, you are actually monitoring and you're aware that, hey, this thing's working, and you know that probably by the end of the week, once the sprint is done, complete or whatever, you'll turn this thing off. You know what I mean? Like right now, mine's not running. I don't need to run it right now. Like it did what it needed to do. Unless I have some new idea or something I want to work on, then I'll trigger it back on and it gets to work. So that'll be the video. This is exactly how you can replace a developer. Hey, you can even scale this across teams and configure it to your own unique workflows. So if you're interested in more videos like this around AI and agents, subscribe to my channel. Check out some of my content. I release videos like this every single week, so stay on the lookout for more. But yeah, once again, thanks for watching. See you in another one.